We're going to try to do this webinar in 25 minutes as promised, and we're doing a series of 6 webinars so far. We have the possibility to extend it depending on what kind of questions we'll get in over the course of these 6 webinars. The last 2 webinars we'll probably compress, and we'll do them from the Progress Puck Challenge. We are a platinum sponsor there, standing next to Progress with our booth. Actually, Sean and I will both be there, so if you guys are coming, stop by the booth and we can have an in-depth chat about all the things that we're going to discuss here as well. I'll spend 10 seconds on telling you guys a little bit about what Servoy does. As most of you know, we work with a lot of ISVs, independent software vendors, so people who produce and sell and market software for a living. We're involved in a lot of modernizations, specifically with companies that have built their applications in the past on Progress technology. So in this series, we kind of want to show you guys what we've seen in the world out there, specifically what Progress companies have done. Want to share some things that work very well and that we can highly recommend you to do. We'll also share some things that we've seen that don't tend to work so well, and yeah, we would encourage you not to do those kind of things. Just as a starter, so this first webinar, as everybody has seen, is about UI and UX for that matter, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on that. The difference between UI and UX and what we think is of most important to your end users and for you to be successful. What we've seen in the past, and we're actually still seeing it, is that if you talk about modernization, companies tend to think that they have to start by picking out their UI frameworks. That picking the right UI framework is crucial. Gluing that on top of their current modernization, their current application, and make that, let's say, the most important thing in their modernization task. We're going to share our opinion on that, and we'll try to guide you, through a modernization strategy in this webinar series. And yeah, today we're kicking off with the first one. As I said, I've got 2 of my colleagues on this webinar. First one is Jan Eleman. Jan is a Servoy founder, an evangelist. He's a big 4GL and rapid application development proponent. That's why he started to build Servoy to make it easy for companies to build applications in this modern internet, cloud-based driven world. The other person we've got on the line is Sean Devlin. Some of you guys probably know Sean. We've done a lot of proof of concept with you guys and are working on a lot of implementations. Sean is one of our senior technical engineers. He's done a lot of Progress modernizations, and very happy that he will be in this series as well. And again, Sean and I will be at the Puck Challenge as well. Having said that, we're trying to make this as interactive as possible. Some of you guys have seen the repeat email that we did earlier today. 6 questions already came in before we're even starting, so we'll try to cover those. During this webinar, feel free to ask more questions. You can do so by going to the questions section in the webinar panel on my right hand. It's probably on your right hand as well, and we'll try to get those questions answered. Jan?
Yeah, thanks, Ivo. Yeah, just for the audience as a reminder, my accent and Ivo's are quite similar because we're both Dutch, but we are 2 different people.
Good point.
Yeah, sometimes we get some feedback from people that they can't differentiate between us. All right, so I'm going to cover the first part of this presentation, then Sean will dive more in the technical details. So this is what we've got for you. A quick introduction, starting with the user experience is important, and that is not the same as UI. And I think we always need to cover a little bit of that. So I'm going to actually have an extra slide on this topic. What does it mean to select your front-end technology, and what is involved in implementing it? And then we'll go into the questions and answers. And as Ivo mentioned, we're trying to keep this under 25 minutes. Let's get started. So UI versus UX is actually very simple. A user interface is a ketchup bottle. It looks great. There's a nice user interface to you. But then when you try to get some ketchup out, you need to do everything in the right order. You need to shake it well. You need to open the top in the right way, and then you need to shake it in the right position to get the exact amount out that you need. If you look at user experience, it's the upside down ketchup bottle. It does exactly what you expect from it. You open it up, and as you press, it comes out. So this is a very simplified paradigm on, obviously, in real life, developing software, and I know this from experience. It's much tougher than this simple paradigm, but this simplifies how UI and UX compare to each other, and user experience has become extremely important in developing great software applications. We all know that. So once you've decided in doing that, the question is, which UI framework do you select? There's a tremendous amount of options out there that you can select nowadays. Over 1,000 different UI frameworks exist. Even if you simply dive into one of them, Bootwatch, which is technically based on Bootstrap, it already offers like 20, 30 different look and feels of what you can implement with it. Other great UIs, Ionic, fantastic UI library for mobile, specialized in mobile experiences. Even if you just zoom in on just material design, which is only one of the UI type of frameworks that you can use, there's even top 10s written out there on the web on which frameworks you can use. But then there's also obviously Microsoft and myriads of other frameworks that you can use to develop your user interfaces for your applications. Twitter Bootstrap, very popular, loads of examples and loads of free and paid for, as you can see in this slide, $10 for a complete set of UI components, from graphs to calendar components to email components, very, very advanced components for just a very low price. And obviously, we all know, being in the progress world, Kendo UI, a very complete and advanced framework to do UI HTML5 development. But let's take a step back. Let's start at the beginning. Are all the non-functional requirements covered? And with non-functional, we mean all the stuff that you progress developers are used to. So things like getting your app out there, testing it, scaling it, doing your multi-tenancy, doing your deployment, doing your consistency across systems. These are all things that were logical in the progress world or other worlds that we've come from, but may not even exist in the UI frameworks that are all out there, the hundreds and even thousands that I mentioned earlier on. So looking at that, what we see with a lot of ISVs, and we're involved in a few hundred of modernization projects, so we get quite some interesting insight into ISVs. We see a few patterns, and we clearly distinct between ISVs that do inside-out thinking, so they start at where they are, and ISVs that do the opposite. They start at the customer. So with inside-out thinking, you start at all your NFRs, your non-functional requirements. So things like scaling and all the things I mentioned in the previous slide, then your business logic, and on top of that to deliver it to your customer, the user experience. However, in an optimal scenario, you should do the opposite. You should start with the user experience. That boils down to business logic that is necessary to deliver the user experience. And at the bottom are the non-functional requirements. Obviously, those are still extremely important, but the key would be to find them in a platform or frameworks that you use to get those delivered so that you can spend your time on the user experience and not the opposite. Let's take a look at an example of an ISV that went through that. So this is a screenshot of an ISV that built an ERP browser-based coming from a 4GL and took it to the browser. And they decided to take the user experience approach. And it was a very tough experience. They really had to change the way they thought, the way they worked, the way the development teams were built up, to start thinking, what does the user expect? What does the user want to do in the application? What does he want to achieve? And that brought up a lot of technical complications, like visualizing data. How are you going to group all the data together and make it really responsive? How are you going to make it work in your mobile devices? How are you going to make the page render quickly? And they come to the conclusion we have to render pages in less than a second because that is acceptable to an end user. The end user obviously has a quick decision. 1 second, acceptable, done. For a developer, this is a tough case because you have to think about all the queries that have to be fired in the backend to your progress database to be able to deliver this kind of data. So it is not very easy to deliver this kind of functionality for a developer. So with this first quick start of high-level overview, I would like to hand over to Sean Devlin, one of our technical engineers, one of our senior engineers who's been involved in a lot of progress projects, to sort of discuss more the technical aspects that are involved in taking these kind of decisions.
Hi there. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, just checking. And Jan, maybe I'll just ask you to move the slides for me so we don't have to change presenter.
No problem.
Yeah, as Ivo and Jan pointed out, I work with a lot of ISVs to help with modernization, and so I was trying to come up with what are the key things that I see work, and what are the key things that I see cause people to struggle. And so we do see that when it's not working well, architecture is driving the UX, or you can really feel that the UX is sort of mapped onto the current architecture. So it really helps to start with the UX and design the application stack around that. And it sounds simple, but within a very technical team, it can be difficult to even see UX. Sometimes we think, well, this is the way that it has to be from a functional point of view, and we don't really stop and consider really from the start of what a user needs and how they flow through an application. So when it's successful, we've seen that companies sometimes involve a UX designer or a UX design process in-house, and we see this is very different from just UI, although it includes UI. A UX designer might consider, from the very first moment that user encounters your product to how they flow through it on a daily basis. So, they call that a customer journey, and developing different kinds of users that use your application and analyzing what kinds of tasks they're trying to achieve to really help developers, to build software that delivers a great user experience and that feels really good. Next slide, Jan. Yeah, so just to revisit from the beginning, we're not just connecting components to an existing application. There's a lot of other things to consider than just the very front end of the technology, but these things still all contribute to having great UX. Whether or not you want a responsive or adaptive application, if you're delivering a web application now, well, you need a web server, you need that middle tier technology. So, what can you do with that to improve UX? Of course, now you also have a session. So caching concerns, and also communication back and forth between the browser and the server. These all become now a technical sort of background to what's happening in the front end. Next slide, please. So I know that I hear all the time from prospects and customers, like, we want responsive, we want mobile first, we want omni-channel delivery, kind of these industry buzzwords. But maybe it helps to talk a bit about what they mean. Responsive and adaptive are very similar, but slightly different. Responsive is an application that adjusts continuously to the amount of real estate available, whereas adaptive is sort of pre-built layouts that change at different breakpoints in a screen resolution. So to the end user, they feel kind of exactly the same. It's just that I get a different layout based on what screen I have or which way it's rotated. But it's different for the developer, and there's design considerations. Responsive is known to be a little bit more heavy on performance, whereas adaptive is a little bit more work in terms of what you need to build and maintain, because you're considering, you know, specific screen sizes. Which one you choose really depends on what kind of user you have, what kind of devices they're bringing, etc. But what I see is that initial assumptions are that, yeah, I'm gonna take a responsive technology like Bootstrap, and that will make my app responsive, and that's the end of it. But that's really the beginning of it, because it's not something that you just turn on and then it's on all the time. It's a different way of designing. So you have to consider the UI and the layout for a responsive application. It's going to be quite different, you know. So you still need to develop and test and really consider what kind of UX you want for each projected, you know, each projected device you're going to have. Next slide here. Also, you know, you have to manage the session, at least on the web server side, yourself when you deliver a web application. I do hear from time to time we're going to do things stateless. We have stateless APIs, etc. That's great, but no application is stateless. Parts of an application stack can and should be stateless. But the reality is that if you want a dynamic user experience, then you do need to have some things being stateful. But also managing state, caching things, it also produces overhead. So you need to consider this in programming, testing, and maintenance, and possibly performance problems if it's not done correctly. So next slide, Jan. Maybe we consider a little bit of the architecture here. I know that I've seen progress shops in particular looking to implement some UI design on top of kind of their existing business logic directly, maybe a stateless API call or web service calls, and it leads to a very transactional user experience, a very transactional feel, where maybe you defer validations to the very end of a submit button, and then you get back 5 different errors that could have been reported sooner or something. You don't have that nice snappy interaction as, you know, you're getting feedback as you're using the application. This can be counteracted, of course, by putting a lot of logic and state into the browser. And I've seen a few progress organizations who were in the middle of a modernization attempt, and they had spent a lot of time, and they had a big web team to do it, to really build this complex tier in the browser for doing some things like validations and such in the browser. But, you know, it requires a lot of web program. It requires, you know, kind of that full stack experience. And, you know, at the same time, it didn't solve all of their UX problems. So just in summary about session management, where we see the most success is when the caching that goes on in the browser has to do with what's happening in the UI only. We're not pushing lots of business logic into the browser and doing some things that have to do with, you know, your data, etc., into the browser. Caching that goes on in the middle tier should be tracking the user, the session, where they are in navigation, what they're doing, even down to mirroring some of what could be going on in the UI, knowing what field they're on, etc. And then the business logic and data access layer, for the most part, remain mostly stateless. So we've seen that kind of setup leads to the best UX, or the possibilities for the best UX. Next slide, please, Jan. So that's part of it, but even if you've sort of decided how you want to break up sort of the load across the web server and the back end and then the very front end, things need to communicate. If you pick a nice UI framework and you have your web server to send it to the browser, it doesn't magically hook back to the web server and do all the things that you want it to do. You have to tie in at the event level. And we see that a more nuanced communication scheme gives you a more dynamic UI. So let's take it for an example. A user is tabbing through some data entry, and you want to present them some feedback, as they work through a form or something. If you can do that in a nuanced way, in background with minimal lightweight communication, then you get a nice snappy UI. You get that nice feeling for the user that they're getting the feedback while they're working. So you're talking about capturing an event, down in the browser, and then taking some action on the server, and then communicating back to the browser so that it can re-render itself. Conversely, you might capture some event on the server that didn't originate on the client. Maybe it originated on a different client. Perhaps I'm ordering an item, and then that item just got ordered by another user and it went out of stock while I was looking at it. Well, it's great UX if you can notify them the moment that happens and not defer that until the end when they click submit, and then they find out, okay, well, now it's out of stock. You don't get that old-fashioned kind of refresh going on. You get a really live, snappy application. That all requires the right communication protocols and the right communication scheme. So in summary, the choices that you want to make in terms of the communication side of your architecture should really focus around what kind of user experiences you're going to need, not what kind of architecture you have in the back end. So those are really the key areas that I'm seeing a lot of struggle, but also an opportunity for success. But for more of an overview or conclusions, maybe Jan, you can summarize for me.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, for the technical aspects, which are obviously critical in taking such a step. So yeah, we could say that modernizing progress applications is easy, but the reality is that it's quite an effort. We've seen many progress ISVs struggle with this. A lot of things that you need to keep in mind to do this. And today we're only touching one out of the 6 subjects that we'll be covering in the next week. So today we talked about UI component independence, so being able to talk to different UI libraries is important as you are selecting your UI framework. You definitely want to look into your development efficiency. So how efficient are your developers going to be with the UI frameworks that you select in going through this process? Keep that in mind. What is the performance of the UI libraries that you've selected in modernizing your frameworks? And Sean discussed the technical aspects of session management. This is a critical component that you should take into consideration while selecting your UI framework. Session management is not an easy thing. We've seen ISVs spend more than a year time in being able to do this efficiently. So make sure that it is on your short list as you're selecting the libraries and frameworks that you're going to use. So boiling this all down, simple conclusion on this topic. Keep in mind that UI frameworks are not the only technology choice as you're moving into modernizing your progress applications. And make sure to choose a complete architecture to support a great user experience. Keep the user experience first, and everything else will follow. We've put our names here on this slide, so if you would like to contact any of us directly, that you can do that. In the next slide, we have the top questions that we got sent in, and you can also type in your questions into the questions channel, and Ivo, who's moderating the session, will be able to channel them to us. Ivo, feel free to interrupt if there's anything popping up. Otherwise, we'll start to answer the top questions. We're also, I think, slightly starting to run out of the time promised, 25 minutes. We're about on time to answer these questions.
Yeah, I think that, Jan, I promised everybody to stick to the 25 minutes. We can take another couple minutes to maybe answer the most critical questions. I got two very technical ones coming in right now. Can we use AngularJS with Kendo UI?
Yes, that should be no problem.
Then let's see, going back to the previous questions that we've got here. We've got a very complex ERP. Is going to the browser even viable? You showed a screenshot, Jan, of a, well, I actually know that ERP vendor, and that's not a small app.
Yeah, we've seen in at the projects we've done at Servoy that even the most complex ERPs can be deployed through a browser. Very often, you will have to rethink the user experience and start with the user first. Do you really want to show 90 fields to this user, or do you want to deliver a great user experience? But can it be done? Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the same counts for question two. I know that a lot of progress companies struggle with this, what we call sub-second rendering, and choosing the right architecture around that, I think is critical. I think that's why Sean went into quite a bit of detail and talked about it. Question number three, I would like to skip that for now, because I think that's going to be a commercial pitch from our end, and we promise not to do that. Question number four, I see somebody actually responding to that as we speak. Important question on everybody's mind. We would like to defer that question to the next webinar, which is actually going to talk about how you can connect to ABL, to your JDBC, to SQL, web services, all those kind of connectivity questions. And I assume, Jan and Sean, that separation of UI and logic is very important for that subject, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So both 4 and 5 will be covered in next week's webinar.
Okay. Question 6 goes back again, I think, to a previous question that we heard. And maybe that's a question that we haven't really answered here, Jan. When you're picking your UI frameworks, from our point of view, do we have a preference for UI frameworks? Can we intermingle UI frameworks? What's our point of view there?
No, as Servoy, we are pretty independent on this. I guess basically also because we don't create any end user UI, but we support all of them. So we are sort of biased in this, in the sense that we support all of them. And we think that you should select the best UI components for your end users. And that may differ. Maybe the graph that Google provides is the best. Maybe the gauge that Kendo UI provides is the best. Why not combine them in the same user interface? We think that you have to start with your end user and then put those into your application. And with today's technology, whether it is Servoy or anything else, it is technically feasible to combine different UI components and select the best for your end users.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jan. We've just crossed the 30-minute mark. I think on your next slide it shows what the next topic will be. But we briefly just touched upon that already. So how to connect to your current ABL so that you don't have to rewrite all of your business logic, but you can reuse your current and leverage your current business logic. And we're going to talk about all of those nice technical terms that you see there: JSDO, SQL, REST, APIs, and how to connect to it.